Today we have Katrina Robertson, the author of Juror number 11, a memoir of the broken justice system and rising from the trials of life, on the podcast today. I'm your host, Brittani Starr. Conversations with indie authors. So welcome, Katrina Robertson, to the podcast today.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Can you share a little bit about your book?
I've been selected as a jury member for a murder trial in our local small town. And I ended up at the conclusion of that trial being charged with contempt of court and faced the possibility of jail time, had huge fees and fines, and then a judge actually found a mistrial in the original trial. So it was kind of this 5 months of hell. So, and then a little bit of backstory about me. I am a foster and adoptive mom. I've adopted 3 boys. I also have 2 biological children, but my adopted children came from foster care, and then one, kind of long story, basically just off the streets. But I've always been very open and vulnerable about the hard of that journey of taking kids from extremely traumatic childhoods into your home and trying to raise them. And because I've always been so open and vulnerable and transparent, over the years, on like my social media and so forth, telling stories, people have told me over the years, you need to write a book. And I'd always be like, no. And so then when I, became this unicorn in the town of causing a mistrial and getting charged, basically having my own hearing after a hearing I was a jury on, I was like, you know what, I'm going to write that book. So that was what kind of prompted it.
So your book, it touches on enduring months of trauma, the threat of jail and significant legal expenses. Can you take us through some of these challenging moments?
Right. It's like, how does that even happen? Okay, so it was a murder trial. And the story was, it was a wife, a 60-year-old piano teacher, never been in trouble, shoots and kills her husband. Her defense was self-defense. Trial gets started, and we all know that you're supposed to walk in with the presumption of innocent until proven guilty. Well, because you're supposed to come in with that presumption, the burden of proof lies on the prosecution, right? Because it's like, okay, we're supposed to assume this person is innocent. What I didn't realize that entailed within our justice system, with the burden of proof being on the prosecution, unfairly weighted balance, giving more ability to the prosecution side. So when you have like opening statements, prosecution goes first, then defense, prosecution then gets to rebuttal. Okay, then they get first at witnesses. And then at closing, they have the first closing arguments, defense has theirs, prosecution then gets to step up and rebuttal everything defense says. So you have that seems like, that seems kind of unfairly weighted. And then also in this particular case, the defendant had a private attorney, one attorney, whereas the prosecution or the state, they had 4 attorneys for them. So they kind of had this whole entire legal team for the prosecution. Then whenever the prosecution, it was then their turn, it was time for them to present their witnesses and evidence. They had 17 witnesses stand up and testify. The state was charging her with first-degree murder. With a first-degree charge, the statute says that they have to prove that she intended to kill her husband. There was intent. Well, these 17 witnesses get up, and not one of them addresses the intent side of it. It was all just, she shot him, which was never part of the equation to begin with. She was at the crime scene and said, I shot him. A day and a half, we listened to this, and then they would deliver it in emotionally manipulating ways. Like they would have a blown up picture of the autopsied body of the victim for us to stare at, while testimony or arguments were being made. And I'm sitting there going, is this really necessary? So you have all that. Well, then, so after the prosecution gets their 17 witnesses, now it's time for the defense's turn to call their witnesses. She had 14 witnesses. And as each of those witnesses were called one by one, the state would object to them. The court would agree with the objection, and they would not be allowed to testify. And there was, I believe, only 3 of those 14 that were allowed to testify. And us as the jury were not allowed to know what they were to testify about, why they were not allowed to testify, or any of that. And so we were left kind of sitting there going, oh, okay, And so I say all that to say I walked into that situation as a jury member. I did not take lightly the responsibility and the task I was given. It was a huge burden on my shoulders. I mean, we're talking about somebody's life here, of an individual and the trajectory of their life. But then also, I mean, not to say that I wanted to make the right decision for the victim's family as well. I mean, obviously you can't go in there with like, we just want to make everybody happy. That I kind of had this sense, this assumption that, cases like this, that you were given all facts and only the facts. I found out that there's a lot of manipulation involved, a lot of emotional manipulation involved. They're allowed to cherry pick information. And I struggled greatly. And I'm very open about exactly why I struggled. And then I was simultaneously going through, like I had mentioned, some very difficult things with some of my children. And that kind of, so I had that on my shoulders as I was in that jury room in deliberations as well. I was struggling. But I was wanting to trust the system. Like my heart, and I'm open and honest in the book, my heart wanted to believe that she was innocent of first degree murder and that this was an act of self-defense. My heart wanted to believe that. But, you're forced to make a decision based only on the evidence presented during the trial. And based on that evidence, I was forced to make a decision that was contrary to what I personally wanted, but I was able to kind of set those emotions aside. And long story short, we ended up finding not guilty on first degree murder and went with second degree murder. But before we had gone into deliberations, all kinds of nuances with rules of evidence and stuff. But most people are probably aware that if you're on jury duty, you're not supposed to talk about the trial. You're not supposed to research anything, all that kind of stuff. And that was drilled into us. Well, I am a researcher by nature. It is who I am. And I'm also a big picture type of person. And I'm a fact. Give me the facts. I also like to know people's stories. I think stories are important and they're powerful. Well, so the day before deliberations that night, when I was just really wrestling with this responsibility that was on my shoulders, I was like, well, I know we can't research the case. I don't have a problem with that. I've just sat through 3 days I know more about this case than anything I could dredge up in some old newspaper article. I said, but all I really know about the defendant is she's a 60-year-old piano teacher and she shot her husband. She claims self-defense, but apparently that was not allowed to even be discussed. And that's a whole nother rule of evidence thing, which may or may not be interesting going into. And I didn't know anything whatsoever about the victim other than he was shot by his wife. There were allegations that he was an alcoholic. There were allegations that he was abusive, but any information regarding either one of them was disallowed. And I was like, I just want to know his story. I want to know if there's anything about him. And so I tried to look up some information about him. Spent about 5 minutes So it wasn't some exhaustive kind of thing. And I think it's because internally, I know, Katrina, don't go down this rabbit hole. You know what I mean? So about 5 minutes and nothing. I pulled up nothing, discovered nothing, shut my computer, and said, I'm just going to have to let it be. Well, in deliberations, after we had already deliberated and we ended up unanimous on second degree murder, I made the statement in the deliberation room. I said, I don't know if y'all struggle as much as I do with the fact that so many of the defendants' witnesses were not able to talk and that we really don't know much about the victim. I said, but I tried to look stuff up on the victim and I didn't find anything. Okay. So I make that statement. 3 days later, it played no weight in our I didn't even make the statement to anybody in particular. Paid no weight in our making a decision or anything. 3 days later, another jury member went back to the courthouse and filed a complaint against me for juror misconduct. The defense attorney grabbed hold of that complaint and asked for a mistrial and wanted contempt of court charges filed against me. So that's how it all happened. I got had to get my own attorney and all that. And my attorney, he said, and I, of course, then I was just absolutely like, we all got summoned back to court. And then when I realized, that it had to do with me, the entire responsibility of all of it was placed on my shoulders. Like, what in the world, like, what planet have I landed on? Because like I mentioned, it was the defense attorney, so the defendant's attorney, that grabbed hold of it and wanted a mistrial. But if you remember, we found her not guilty on first degree. He was thereby opening up the possibility for his client to get charged with first degree all over again. And it's like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? Like, and then all of the jurors had to testify, and only 3 of them even had any recollection of anything even being said, which made it apparent that I wasn't trying to persuade or prejudice but yet the judge still declared a mistrial. I'll leave just with a cliffhanger. The mistrial never ends up happening. And I'll just say, you got to read the book to find out what exactly happened.
And can you tell us where can people find the book and where can they find you online too?
Sure. So the book, the easiest place is to just go to Amazon. If you search Juror #11, and then the subtitle, A Memoir of the Broken Justice System and Rising from the Trials of Life. Website, I was able to just get live. I've kind of had the opportunity to start doing some speaking engagements. And so I kind of created a website to help facilitate that. And it's just Katrina L. Robertson.com. So you can find me there. And then if you just want to contact me, I've had lots of people over the years reach out to me that are also like foster and adoptive moms that just, parenting is not for the faint of heart. But when you add a layer of a child with a traumatic background, it's kind of like takes things to a whole nother level. The thing that I just wanted to do was to make myself more visible to foster and adoptive moms if they just I don't have all the answers, but I can say you're not alone and you're doing a good job.
Well, thank you so much for being here today and for sharing that. Like, I need to run out and grab that book now because I'm like, what happened?
Right. Well, so I'll leave just another little nugget too, that I've actually developed a relationship with the defendant now, and she teaches my son piano. So anyway, so you can find out how that all came about as well at the end of the book.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for being here today, Karen Robertson. Go find her online and find her book on Amazon. Thank you for joining us on this enlightening episode of the Zarlequan Podcast. Remember to subscribe to our newsletter so you never miss a beat.